Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. Tonight we are concluding our mini-series of creating a life of joy. This might be the fifth or sixth class in the series, and we are going to conclude tonight. Now, it goes without saying that in principle we could continue to learn for a long time, but with the Pesach break coming up, and after that, it will be time for something new. Hopefully, it will be a very pleasant surprise for everyone. And so tonight, we are going to conclude at least as much as we have been able to cover. Tonight will be what's called a leket, a kind of like not a mishmash, but a collection of various sayings in our tradition about joy, with a little discussion about some of them, trying to get as many different angles and perspectives as we can in here. There's no particular order here, just a collection of different ideas, quotes from various sources. So I want to start with a quote from the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet. Ecclesiastes is known as a very, very philosophical work. There's some of it borders on, I wouldn't call it depression, but borders on a certain vanity. That's the whole thing. Hevel hevelim. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And Shlomo Melech kind of vents many existential questions and attitudes, and it's somewhat controversial. In fact, the sages considered not putting it in the Bible, because of the fear that it might be misrepresented. But when you really go into it, both King Shlomo shows a lot of different perspectives on life and attitudes towards life. And even though most of it seems very kind of down, there is a certain idea that he repeats a number of times. And so I just want to read one of them. It's in the 3rd chapter, the 12th verse. And this comes actually right after the 14 pairs of there is a time for this and a time for that, a time for this, a time for that, time to laugh and a time to cry, a time for war and a time for peace, and 14 dualistic emotions that everyone experiences. But right after, he says the following. He says, Yadati ki ein tov bam ki im lismoach v'lasot tov b'chayav. It's almost surprising that in the midst of different statements, he says, I know that there is no good for people other than to be joyous and to do good in their lives. V'gam kol adam she'ochel v'shata v'ra'a tov b'chol amalo. And also that a person should eat and drink and see good in the works of their hands. Mitet Elokim hi, because this is coming from God. So this is very, very important, especially in the midst of many, many vanity of vanity types of statements, that everything is vanity. But here, and Shlomo Melech repeats this a number of times, this idea of just be happy with what you have, eat and drink. At one point, he says to be happy with your spouse, and this is all we can expect. But that's a lot. That's what we've been trying to say this whole series, that the choice to be happy is probably the most important choice we make every day, despite all the obstacles and problems that we all face, all of the hassles and everything. So this is a good place to begin the class tonight from Shlomo HaMelech. Another idea that we haven't discussed at length, but it's one of these, we'll call it strategies for increasing joy in our life, especially when we're not feeling especially joyous. And that is, in order to be happy, we have to do things that make us happy. It sounds like a very simple statement, an obvious statement, but when it comes to life, it's not obvious at all. Not obvious at all. Because when we're not feeling good, when we're feeling sad or depressed, it's not easy to like, oh, let's just do something that makes us happy. Our mind is in a different place. But nonetheless, if we find our place in a state of frustration, being bored, being uninspired, so a very important strategy is, well, what makes you happy? And if you can identify it, it could be big things, it could be small things, it could be something you can just do in a few minutes. It could be like, I need to take some time and go do X. That will really help me feel better. So like I said, it's a very simple strategy, but well worth remembering. That to be happy, we need to do things that make us happy. So I'll bless everyone, first of all, to be able to quickly identify what can I do right now? I have an hour, I have a half an hour, I have 10 minutes, I have a whole day, and I'm not feeling especially inspired right now, but I don't want to feel this way. So the idea is, okay, go do something that makes you happy. Then it's brought down in many, many different sources that one of those things that can make us happy is doing something good for someone else. Shlomo Melech even hinted at that, to do good in your life, that is part of the formula for being happy. And many, many different Rebbes say a similar thing, that if you're in one of these states and you don't know what to do with yourself and you're bored and uninspired and not particularly happy, so they say, go do a mitzvah. Find a mitzvah to do. And in many cases, the mitzvah is helping someone else out. There's so many different ways, and there's so many people we know who could use help, could use encouragement and strength. So this is also a wonderful strategy, is by doing something for someone else, makes them happy, but it really, really makes us happy as well. I think everyone knows that. Now, here again, there's no particular order here. These are just different notes that I took. Many, again, are coming from Rav Ginsburg's book, Being Happy the Whole Year, which was written mostly about the month of Adar, but is applicable for the whole year. So in the discussion of Adar, in a leap year, there's two Adars, Adar Aleph and Adar Bet. And we celebrate Purim in Adar Bet, in the second Adar. So there is a question, a halacha question, of how important is it to make a feast on Adar Aleph, on the 14th of Adar, which is called Purim Katan. Now, we don't read the Megillah, and we don't give gifts to the poor, and we don't give Mishloach Manot, gifts of food. But there is a question, should we make a feast? It doesn't have to be like the same level of feast that we make on Purim. But the question is, should we make a feast? And there's discussion among the authorities. And so the Ramah, who is a decider of law for Ashkenazim, so he quotes a verse and says, Tov lev mishtet tamid. Someone with a good heart is up to, is willing to, is able to have a feast always ready to feast. And here we don't mean just eating. It means to celebrate, because every feast goes along with singing and with family and friends and joy. And so that's what he says. Tov lev mishtet tamid. That we should always be ready to celebrate. So there's an explanation, and he says that we should be machmir. Machmir means we should be stringent. In other words, we should be stringent in making a feast on the first Adar, on the 14th. So there's really an amazing idea that comes out of here, is that machmir, that's the word for being strict or stringent. So it's the same root as chomer, which means physicality. And it's also the same root as the word for donkey, chamor. And so one of the explanations is when it says that Mashiach will come riding on a donkey, one of the ways we can understand it is that he will be machmir in joy. Because as we've learned, the letters of Mashiach, when permuted, spell yismach, he will be joyous, or yisamach, he will cause joy to others. And so the Mashiach will be very machmir in being joyous. So it's just such a beautiful idea, a beautiful idea to hold on to. Okay. Now Rav Ginsburg explains, as he always will bring in numerical gems. So he says that the root for sameach, shin mem chet, in different forms, different grammatical forms, appears 271 times in the Tanakh, in the Bible. 271 times you have the root sameach, lismoach. So he explains 271 is the gematria of another word, harayon, to be pregnant. To be pregnant is 271, and it means this idea here, it means that joy brings newness to birth. That's the idea here, is that when we're joyous, we have a new perspective on life. We have what are called chidushim. We could be on a level of novel Torah insights. And this is very connected to the idea of the sages that say that Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration and nevuah, prophecy, only comes upon a person in a state of joy. So there's a deep connection between having divine inspiration and being in a state of joy. And so Rav Ginsburg says that since the root appears 271 times, it's the idea of giving birth. Now, what we've learned, this is very connected to the Sphira of Bina, because we've learned that every Sphira has an inner motivational dimension. And the inner dimension of Bina is Simcha. That's why in the series we've come back to Bina many times. And it comes from a verse, Aim Habanim Smecha. A mother of children is joyous. And here it doesn't mean just physical children in a biological way, but someone who gives birth to a new idea in Torah. It's like giving birth to a child, and it brings tremendous joy. And so here, the fact that the root of Simcha appears 271 times, and it's connected to pregnancy, the word Harayon, and pregnancy is connected to Bina, and Bina is connected to joy. So here we have a series of ideas that are all connected. And ultimately, we have the idea of the joy that comes from meditation. Because the Hebrew word, or one of the two Hebrew words for meditation, is hitbonenut, from the word bina. And so there's a tremendous joy in Jewish meditation, especially when it's focused on the inspiration behind the meditation is the Torah itself. It's delving into a mitzvah, a kavanah, an intent, understanding something in the text, understanding a verse, a name, and all the other things that go along with Jewish meditation. This brings tremendous, tremendous joy. Now here we should point out, we have mentioned this, but we're going to just go a little bit deeper. There are two different verses that talk about joy, talk about serving God. One says, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, serve God with joy. The other one says, Ivdu et Hashem b'yira, serve God with awe or respect or healthy fear. Healthy fear, I choose to use the word tremendous respect, because that's what we're talking about. Yirat Hashem is the, understanding our relationship to God and the incredible respect due to our Creator. And so here it seems like opposites. One says serve God with joy, the other one was with yira, but of course they're not contradictory at all. There's different ways and at different times and different circumstances of how to serve God. But here we could learn that serving God with yira is also serving God with joy. So actually Rav Ginsburg points out when it says, Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, Ivdu et Hashem b'yira, Ivdu means serve God. But it's the same word, means to work. And so what comes to my mind, Rav Ginsburg didn't say it like this, but he meant it like this. I think everyone remembers the song, Whistle While You Work. The idea that we can even turn work into a joyous experience. This is the deep teaching from the Baal Shem Tov. B'chol derachecha de'egu. In all of your ways, know him. And since so many of us spend so much time working, it could be for pay, or it could be just working around the house, or working, taking care of the children, or doing errands, whatever it is, it's task oriented. We'll call it work. And so Rav Ginsburg said that this is one of the great secrets of life is, if you're going to spend a third of your day working, then try to find ways to make it in a joyous fashion. Now, Rav Ginsburg points out another thing, that the first time that the word simcha is used, we'll call it strangely or ironically, it's by Lavan. And this is when Yaakov, after 20 years of taking care of Lavan's sheep and feeling very, very ripped off, he finally comes to a deal with Lavan. And Lavan thinks that Yaakov is a total idiot and a fool, and he's going to even benefit more. But Yaakov basically, in a straightforward, honest way, his plan worked, and he took a good amount of Lavan's wealth. And then God comes to him and says, it's time to go back to Israel. So Yaakov is somewhat fearful of mentioning to Lavan, I'm planning on leaving. So he leaves with his whole family. And Lavan comes after him, and he complains to him, you've like stolen my children and grandchildren by stealing off in the middle of the night. And then he says, I would have sent you away b'simcha u'b'shirim, with joy and song. And this happens to be that the first time in the Torah that the word simcha is used. So here we could see two important things. One is simcha is co-joined with song. And this is an obvious connection, that one of the activities that brings people such joy on an individual level and also on a communal level is song, especially in prayer. That's how many, many people experience joy in a community, is when a community gets together and sings the prayers. Karl Bach davening in our day. So that is one important thing. But Rav Ginsburg points out that the gematria of b'simcha u'b'shirim equals 913. 913 is the numerical value of the first word of the Torah, Bereshit. And so Rav Ginsburg says that from this we can learn that God not only created the world through speech, like we say every morning, Baruch she'amar v'hayalam, blessed is the one who spoke, and the world came into being. But God sang with joy the world into being. These are Rav Ginsburg's words. And I have to say, I was overjoyed to see this, because some of you probably have my book, The Mystical Power of Music. And that is one of the basics of the whole book, is that God created the world through song. Not going to go into that right now, but that's the premise, and it's very connected even to modern science, string theory, quantum physics, the idea of God singing the world into being. And so here, that's what Rav Ginsburg says we can learn from this, that the simcha u'b'shirim equals 913, equals Bereshit. And from this we learn that God sang the world into being. So these are all short but powerful powerful ideas. Okay, now I want to bring down 4 other ideas from Rav Ginsburg, and he arranges them according to the 4 letters of God's name. And we're not going to go deeply into that, but we're going to start from below, meaning from the last hey in God's name. And he says that the 4 ideas that he's going to bring here, each one has a power to bring us joy. So here, we'll call it almost on the lowest level, is he brings the verse, Kol neshama tehallel. The breath of every living thing shall praise you. And he brings the explanation from the sages, Al kol neshima v'nishima, meaning literally on every breath. So here, again, I'll go back, Kol ha-neshama tehallel, the soul of every living thing shall praise you. But the word for soul, neshama, is the same root as breath, neshima. And so the sages said, don't read it, every soul shall bless you, but with every breath you shall praise God. And so that's why it's the lower hey, because this is very body connected. And this is the importance of breath in meditation. Now, many people are familiar with this idea in Eastern meditation, but here is an important source from quite literally thousands of years ago that is saying the same thing. We have it from a Jewish source, the idea that there is a way of meditating on God through breath, and that meditating connects us with great joy, with great joy. I should mention here, and you could look this up on YouTube, that Rav Ginsburg formulated a meditation according to 4 letters that spell the word chedva. Chedva is one of the words of joy. There are many, many words of joy. We have focused mostly on simcha, but chedva is one of the words of joy. And the chet equals 8, the daled equals 4, the vav equals 6, and the hey equals 5. I'm going to explain this quickly, but there is a YouTube with Rav Ginsburg explaining this meditation. It's a breathing meditation, but the fact that it's to the word chedva means that it is connecting us to a deep inner joy. So the way it's done very simply is we breathe in, and for 8 counts, that's the chet. We hold the breath for 4 counts, that's the daled. We breathe out for 6 counts, that's the vav. And then we enter into a state of rest for 5 counts. So it's 8 breathing in, 4 holding, 6 breathing out, and 5 relaxing. And the idea is after a number of times, don't even have to count anymore. It's just more on just concentrating on the word chedva and the idea of joy. Very connected to this is the same meditation on the 4 letters of God's name, a yud and a hey and a vav and a hey, because it's very, very close to the same breathing system here. Instead of a chet, we begin with the first letter of God's name, a yud. Instead of holding it for 4, we hold it for 5, the hey. The breathing out is the same, 6, and the resting is the same, 5. So in other words, the last 2 letters of Chedva are the exact same last 2 letters of God's 4-letter name. And just the Yud and the Hey are just slightly different. So this makes a very, very potent meditation through breathing and being able to focus and concentrate on God's name. And then, of course, that is the beginning of the meditation, and it can take you, depending on your kavana, it can take you to all kinds of places. Then, going up to the Vav of God's name. So Rav Ginsburg says, Il Malay HaKadosh Baruch Hu Azro Ein Yecholo. If God would not help a person, he would not be able to. Now, this is a general statement. Now, remember, the first Hey that we discussed is breath, is body. It's like the nefesh. This is more the emotions that a person realizes, if God wouldn't help me, I wouldn't be able to do anything. But specifically, this quote, it relates to the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. In the Gemara, it says that the evil inclination wants to kill a person. Could be morally, could be ethically. It could be to kill his inspiration, kill his faith, and maybe by dragging him into terrible lifestyles, actually kill him bodily. So that's what the sages say. If God would not help him, a person would not be able to defeat the evil inclination. So that's on the level of the emotions, which is the Vav of God's name. Then moving up to the first Hey of God's name, it's very similar, but it's Hu Hanotein Lecha Koach Lasot Chayil. He is the one who gives you strength to succeed, to accomplish. Hu Hanotein Lecha Koach Lasot Chayil. And so this is a little bit more of an intellectual kind of idea. It's very similar to the one we just discussed, that without God's help, we wouldn't be able to accomplish. But here, it's more in the positive. He is the one who gives you strength. The other one is, we'll call it more of an emotional, that if he wouldn't give me strength, I couldn't make it. And here, it's more of an awareness, an acknowledgement that the only way I have the strength to accomplish anything is because God is giving me the strength. And then the highest level, we can understand on 2 levels. One, Rav Ginsburg writes, Etzem Heyot Yehudi, the simple fact that I am a Jew. And there's many, many stories of even Rebbes who were not feeling like super joyous, were kind of a little bit down in the dumps. And what brought them back to a state of joy is everything else might be going wrong right now, but at least I can be joyous because I'm a Jew. Similarly, this could be taken by anyone, Jew or non-Jew, is the joy of being connected to God. Because the joy of being a Jew means I'm connected to God. Like the word Yisrael. If the sin sound of the shin is changed to a shin, it's Yeshar Kel. We have a straight line, an open communication with God. But any person, especially if they have a connection to Torah, have a connection to the Jewish people, have a connection to the land of Israel, that means that they have a connection to God. And so everyone can be joyous on whatever level they are in their connection to God. Okay, now I just want to go through some important sources in our tradition that talk about joy. There are many, many ones. I just picked out a few here. And one is very connected to what we just learned about the gematria of 913 being B'simcha Ubishirim, in joy and song. And that equals Bereshit, and that God was joyous when he created the world. But there's actually a midrash that says without the numerical gematria. So it says like this. This is Midrash Tanchuma in Parshat Shmini. It says, Kishabara Kadosh Baruch Hu et olamo, haita simcha gedola lefanav. That when God created his world, there was great joy for him. So here, just even without the gematria, we have the source that God created the world through joy. This is very, very important because that means in a certain way that the fabric of the universe is joy. And that's a very important statement, that the fabric of the universe, because if God invested, put his energy into creation, and there is no creation without God's continual energy. God in his goodness renews, that God in his goodness renews the works of creation. So there's a constant flow of God's joy into the world. And so when we can't find anything else to be joyous about, this is such an important idea. We could just try to transcend our present problems and difficulties and plug in that at this moment, God's joy is flowing into the world. It's the very fabric of creation. Now, here's an idea that we mentioned already, but I'm bringing the source here. This is in Tana Devei Eliyahu, Zuta, a very important ancient text. And it says, HaTorah nichnit b'simcha. Simple statement. The Torah is acquired through joy. Now, we actually had this concept before, and it was related to the Arizal. But this is coming from thousands of years ago, this text. But the Arizal, the great Kabbalist of Sfat, was once asked, on what merit were you able to learn these great secrets of the Torah? And he answered that because he did the mitzvot in joy. And if he said it, it meant like for real, like when he would do a mitzvah, he infused it with joy. And so here is the ancient source to this idea. Now here's a more this is actually based on the Talmud in Ketubot 111a, where it says, it is greater if you cause someone to smile than if you feed him milk. This comes from the Talmud. And so Reb Shlomo Zalman, a recent halachic authority, said, "We know how great a mitzvah tzedakah is, yet causing another person to smile is even greater." That, excuse me. So remember, we had the story of the one of the sages who was in the shuk, in the market, and he was at a very high level, and he saw Eliyahu Navi, and he said, "Is there anyone in this market that just merits the world to come?" And he pointed out to these two people who were standing and talking to people. So the sage afterwards goes up to them and says, what are you doing in the shuk? And they said, we come to the market often because we know that a lot of people in the market have lots of problems, and we come and we try to cheer people up. We try to tell them a nice story, a little joke, and bring joy to people. And so Eliyahu Navi says, that's the kind of person who will merit the world to come. Now here's a quote from the Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov says that when he was talking about the obligation to be in a state of joy and to serve Hashem with joy. So he says, when a generation has leaders and the heads of the generation are happy people, it changes the whole generation. It awakens the sense of joy for the whole generation. So this, of course, goes with the whole idea of the power of the tzaddik, the power of the righteous leader, and that he has the power to spread not just joy, but goodness and Torah and everything good, and it affects the whole generation. So halavai, we would merit leaders who knew the secrets of joy. Now it says in the Talmud, it says, Ein omdin lehitpalel ela mitok simcha shel mitzvah, that a person should not get up to pray other than when they are in a state of doing the mitzvah with joy. Now it's interesting because there's another statement that it seems to say very different. It says, don't stand up to pray except with, like, I'll call it a serious or level-headed mind. In other words, one shouldn't go into prayer frivolously, without just, casually. But it's not really a contradiction. It's very similar to Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha and Ivdu et Hashem b'gira. Serve God with joy, serve God with awe or respect or fear of God. And they're not really contradictory. When we have awe of God, this should bring us great joy. So the same thing with davening. There's no contradiction of approaching prayer in a level-headed, serious manner and feeling joy at the same time. It's not a contradiction. Now here is actually the quote that we've said a number of times, even tonight. Ein ruach hakodesh shura el al lev samech. This is from the Talmud Yerushalmi, the Sechet Sukkah. It says, divine inspiration does not rest on anyone who's not in a state, here it says literally, a happy heart, has a happy heart. And we'll end with this last one. Simcha liyisrael ki'ilu simcha lefanav. This is from a midrash, the Mechilta in Beshalach. It says, when someone in Israel has joy, it's as if God also has joy. In other words, if we want to serve God with joy, so what's the serving? How we think of being joyous is like, oh, that's my experience. I want to be joyous because it's a great feeling. It's a good experience. But here we're talking about serving God with joy. So what's the serving? So this is part of the answer, is that when we're in joy, it brings joy to God. We're God's children. And what parent wants to see their child suffering or unhappy? So here, serving God with joy is bringing God joy. That's the service, is bringing God joy. So these are just a collection of ideas about joy. I just want to kind of do like a review here of some of the important ideas. And with that, we will conclude this series. Some of the ideas, and I'm just going to mention them as a review, is we discussed how being happy is a moral obligation. Because when we're not happy, it affects everyone around us. And it's highly selfish to show your unhappiness around other people because it affects them deeply. And so being happy is a moral obligation. We talked about that being unhappy is relatively easy because there are so many reasons for being unhappy, because we all have 24/7, we have things to worry about. We have obstacles, we have difficulties, we have challenges, and rarely does everything go right in our lives. And so one of the main ideas we've tried to explore is a person has to work at being joyous. It does not come naturally for most people. Some people, maybe it does. But for most people, we have to work at being joyous. And that's why we've gone through so many different strategies to try to help. We also said if you take the word bisimcha and you permute the letters, it equals machshava, thought. And that is like the kind of a support for the idea of being joyous, even though we think of the heart. We think of the emotion, being happy is an emotional experience. But it starts in the intellect. It's a decision. It comes from thought that we have to, like the Baal Shem said, and later Chabad rabbis, think good and it will be good. And it depends on our thought. It's like the thought is not coming from the heart. The thought has to make a decision that I'm going to transcend all the reasons that I could be unhappy in order to be happy. Then we discussed at length one of the biggest challenges we all face, and especially now what's going on with Israel and Jews around the world, is how to be happy when there's tragedy happening, when there's, we'll call it good reason to not be happy, when trauma happens, when pain happens, when loss happens. So we discussed that at length. And again, to everything there is a season. When it's time to mourn, it's time to mourn. We don't pretend, oh, we have to be happy now. The type of happiness we're talking about is an ongoing happiness, that even in the pain or trauma or loss, we don't lose all hope. We don't lose all perspective. We maintain a certain level of joy of being alive, of all that we do have. And that gives us strength to deal with the adversity. We discussed with the ideas of the difference between fun and joy. Fun is a very for the moment kind of experience. Sometimes it's needed. There's nothing wrong with having fun, but not when you equate it with happiness. When people think the more fun I have in the long run, the happier I will be, that does not work. In a context of being happy, having fun is great, but not as a replacement for all those things that can give us true happiness. Fun lasts for however long you're doing that, maybe a couple of good memories from it, but it doesn't solve the reasons why people are unhappy. We talked about not adopting a victim look at ourselves. It's the type of self-esteem that we beat ourselves up, that we don't like ourselves. With those kinds of attitudes, a person simply cannot be happy. And there are times that we are victims, that things happen to us just out of the blue, unplanned, unfair, and we feel it. But it doesn't mean that we have to adopt a lifelong attitude of victimhood. And then we talked about the importance of finding meaning and purpose in life, from little things to big things. And there's many, many different levels of finding meaning and purpose, but it's indispensable for creating a life of joy. Without having a sense of purpose, then life can be a big drag, really. Having purpose gives us a sense of mission in this world, of importance. That what we do and think and say is important, and it matters to other people and it matters to God. And then there was the idea of expectations. The more expectations we have, the more possibility for disappointment. And we're human beings and we do have expectations. And sometimes expectations are positive and need to be stated or put on the table. But we're talking about exaggerated expectations of, a whole realm of what is magili, what I deserve. And that can be an endless pit of expectations, and it really leads to a lot of unhappiness. So as much as possible, we should minimize expectations and not be too connected or hung up about them. And then one last thing we'll say, this applies to all of us in one way or another, that one of the greatest ways of finding purpose and mission is through religion, is through Torah, is through the Mitzvah, is through our connection with God. It's through a bigger picture of what this world is about. And so the Jewish lifestyle, a Torah lifestyle, is such a boon to bringing joy in our life. All of the holidays, every Shabbat, so many mitzvot that we have a chance to do to help ourselves and especially help others. That all day long, 100 blessings a day, 100 blessings a day to be grateful for. So I'll end this series with a blessing that each and every one of us can find the strength to work on being happy, to take those steps that it takes to be happy, and may we see the Mashiach, who will be the master of joy. He'll be very machmir in not only being joyous himself, but bringing joy to the whole world. May we experience it very, very soon. No.